And these people lived in Egypt for at least 200 or 400 years and never mentioned the pyramids. It's just not possible, is it? They did mention the pyramids, but they called them Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb. And if you look at the descriptions of Mount Sinai, especially if you include the descriptions from Josephus, all of those descriptions match the Great Pyramid of Giza. They say it was the highest mountain. Yes, it was. The Great Pyramid is the highest. It was sharp, difficult to climb. Yes, it was. It was the biggest mountain, as we've said, but it was also small enough that you could cordon it off, because you weren't allowed to touch the mountain. So you could actually put a cordon around the bottom and stop people touching it. So it had to be actually quite small. It had a cave inside it. Now, a lot of people will say that Moses went to the top of Mount Sinai. He didn't. He went inside Mount Sinai. And the Quran is quite emphatic about this, that he went, or initiates went down inside the mountain holding on a rope. So there was a cave inside it, just like there is in the Great Pyramid. And perhaps most convincingly of all, at the base of the pyramid, at the base of Mount Sinai, was a pavement, a basalt pavement that looked like the night sky, polished, gleaming like the night sky. So where would you find that in the Sinai Peninsula? Well, you can't. But of course, on the eastern face of the Great Pyramid, we have the Great Basalt Pavement. And originally that would have been a huge black basalt pavement, which would have been polished and shone like the night sky. Which would have been polished and shone like the night sky. And so, yeah, the Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid of Giza.
You know, are you going to continue on that statement?
No, that's fine.
I was going to say, I think we're running up on our time limit, but that is so intriguing that I would like to say at this point, to have any of us that are intrigued with this, to take a look at your books. They're really pretty incredible works, and
Yes.
I would love to be able to just secret away for about 2 weeks with them and read every one of them, and I'll do the best I can.
Well, if I can say so myself, whether you agree with what I've written or whether you don't, the books are 100% original. So you won't find reprocessed information from other people's books.
Right.
These are new thoughts, new ways of looking at these problems. And there's an awful lot of information in those books. They are worth reading and then reading again, because every page has new facts. There's no padding, there's no extras. It's all new information.
I see. In part one of our interviews with Ralph Ellis, he shared his research into the roots of some of the most illustrious characters from the Old Testament. In this interview, Ralph discusses what he believes to be the roots or family tree, as it were, of Jesus. In brief, Ralph's research, based on the books of Josephus, who diaried events he witnessed, along with information contained in the original Torah. Where we last left off, we were talking about the similarities between Egyptian history and the Old Testament and the plight of the Israelites. How a lot of the names, the buildings, the family structures, etc., actually overlay each other in a more than convenient way. So now we're going to continue along that line. You've written a book called Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, and this would be quite shocking to a lot of people. So let's go ahead and dive right into it, because we're going to assume they've already watched the previous interview.
Yes.
Okay? So getting into the bloodline of Jesus, let's start right there with Jesus's ancestry according to what you've been able to glean
Right.
from the texts.
And this also takes up on the next book as well, so it's not just Jesus Last of the Pharaohs, but it's also Cleopatra to Christ as well. Because
Right.
I wrote, Jesus Last of the Pharaohs was my first book. And I wrote this, and I said quite clearly at the end of this book that Jesus had to be from the Egyptian royal line, hence the name of the book, Last of the Pharaohs. But I didn't know where you could hang him on the Egyptian royal line. I didn't
Right.
know from, what era he sprang or from which part of the royal line. And so this sort of waited for several years until I could get my my research into this going again. And so I had this problem, and the basic problem was I knew that Jesus was royal. There are many parts of the Bible that sort of hinted at being royal.
And this is popping up in a lot of different literature now.
Absolutely, yes, it's all over. I mean,
He wasn't a lowly carpenter.
Indeed, no. The carpenter business came from Setepenra, which was the one of the titles of the pharaohs of Egypt. Setepenra means the God's carpenter. He was the king of the Jews, so we knew he was royal. Christ, he was the Christ. Christ means king. That's what it means. It means king. So we knew he was royal. I knew he was something to do from the Egyptian royal line, because if you do a comparison between the Bible and Josephus and his works, it's clear that he was also called the Egyptian false prophet. I knew that Jesus was royal. There are many parts of the Bible that sort of hinted at being royal.
And this is popping up in a lot of different literature now.
Absolutely, yes, it's all over. I mean,
He wasn't a lowly carpenter.
Indeed, no. The carpenter business came from Setepenra, which was the one of the titles of the pharaohs of Egypt. Setepenra means the God's carpenter. He was the king of the Jews, so we knew he was royal. Christ, he was the Christ. Christ means king. That's what it means. It means king. So we knew he was royal. I knew he was something to do from the Egyptian royal line, because if you do a comparison between the Bible and Josephus and his works, it's clear that he was also called the Egyptian false prophet. So again, we have this link to Egypt. And we know that Jesus went to Egypt for his education.
Right.
So we have this link. He was royal, and he was also something to do with Egypt.
Although in the Bible it would really be interpreted more as a status of his morality and position as God's son, as the king of men.
That's rather confusing.
So you're saying it's actually quite literal.
He was literally a royal.
Right.
But we have another problem here. And that is that at his birth, it is said that he was visited by the Magi. Now the Magi were the priesthood of Persia, or Parthia. But they were not only the priesthood, they were also the kingmakers of Parthia. Now when Jesus was born, and I'm taking him to be born in AD 4 or AD 6 at the time of the taxation event. Now at that time, the throne of Parthia, or Persia, was empty. So what were the Parthian Persian kingmakers doing at Jesus' birth, looking at Jesus as a potential monarch? So we have a problem here.